Hi, everyone. My name is Hamid, and you are watching the IPR Measurement Commission videocast series that we're calling Measure Up. Measure Up is about everything that's happening in the world of strategic communications and public relations, specifically as it pertains to measurement. A big part of this series is having conversations with executives and leaders from the academic community, the corporate community, and also leaders from the agency world to get their perspectives on how they're navigating these challenging times. Today, I'm very pleased to have Dr. Sarab Kochhar, who has been a big contributor to IPR over so many years and is someone that I myself have been sort of closely watching in terms of her research and her contributions to the PR field for many years now, and I'm excited to have her join us for this discussion. Welcome, Sarab.
Thank you so much, Mo. I'm so excited to be here. So thanks again for inviting me.
Absolutely. You've had a really interesting journey over the years, and I'm sure the IPR community can really benefit from hearing about it. So let's start with that. So, what's your journey been like? From a public relations and communication standpoint, you've played so many different roles, and you've been a part of so many different communities in public relations. So tell us a little bit about that journey.
Absolutely, Mo. I think when I think about my journey and when I really think about what I've had the opportunity to do and be a part of, I think it has been really exciting. Starting from my work in India with the government of India, then being able to work with Burson Marsteller in Bangalore, and I remember during those times, Bangalore being the IT hub was such an interesting time to work in Bangalore, but also work on some of the best tech clients that any PR professional could dream of. So working there and understanding public relations from a technology point of view, from earned media and social media was just beginning to really uh, become as important or as integral to any communication campaign as it is today. I very soon realized that public relations or communication is a strategic tool, and to understand that from a strategy point of view, you really have to study it further. You have to understand what the data, what the research means, and that's how my journey towards a PhD started. And I came to the US, did my PhD from University of Florida in communication, and a special focus on business strategy. And after working there, I joined the Institute for Public Relations as their director of research, and had the privilege to work with the institute, with the trustees, with all the wide knowledge around things. I was also lucky and fortunate to work and be a part of the team at APCO Worldwide, and worked there for almost more than 5 years. I was actively engaged with the academic community, still reviewing papers and journals for different academic journals, and then realized that this all how this all makes sense from a research, from a data perspective. And at present, it's been a year now that I am with Kaiser Permanente, and I am actually working and managing and running an insights and analytics function there. So I think my background, as I mentioned, is very diverse, is very interesting, and I'm so lucky that I've had the opportunities that I've had. So
Sure, and it's been such an interesting one. I think many of us have had, uh, experiences that are very homogenous in a sense. Only folks that have focused on the agency ecosystem or the in-house ecosystem or the academic experience, but you've had all of the above. So I think what it does is it gives you a particularly unique perspective on what's happening with strategic communications, especially from a measurement and insight standpoint. And so, taking that point forward, Sarah, I think let's talk about the elephant in the room. COVID-19 has had such a transformational impact on the world, but also domestically in the corporate community and in public relations and strategic communications. From your perspective, and especially as it pertains to your experience in the healthcare world, how have PR and strategic comms been impacted by COVID-19?
So absolutely, when I really look at the COVID-19, and you really think about how that COVID-19 has really impacted, I think it's very interesting to realize that this has been the biggest of the health and humanitarian crises any organization has ever experienced. When you especially look at it from the organizational standpoint, it's interesting to see how organizations and brands are struggling or are really dealing with this new normal. You look at any of the research that's out there, it really talks about the new normal. It really talks about the changing shifts and attitudes and behaviors in consumers. And that really means a lot for organizations and for brands, and ultimately for PR and communications functions as well. I think the more and more we really understand it from a global perspective, and even if I look at healthcare, if I look at consumer goods, things have changed where companies and CEOs are thinking about their workforce. They are really thinking about their consumers. They are really thinking about the what, why, and how of consumer attitudes and behaviors. And they understand that after even this pandemic is over, the attitudes and these behaviors would change forever. So I think that really raises a very interesting question for PR and comms by saying that all the work that we have done and we have done to understand our stakeholders and how they behave and how they think, we might have to start with a different slate altogether after this COVID-19 is over, because no longer would the consumers be buying and thinking the same ways that they were doing earlier. I just want to share that when I was looking at some research, I found that the focus of consumers and the behaviors of how they would buy things would really shift a lot. They would really be supporting brands that have a purpose. The consumers would have a higher emphasis and focus on health. And then this really big love for local would be another thing that consumers would be really thinking about. And it has been such an interesting shift, which started with COVID-19. Then it continued with the economic challenges that the organizations had been facing. And then the systemic racism and the discussion around inequity that really added to those challenges as well. So I think to just bring all these perspectives together, I think COVID-19 would really make sure that companies pause for a minute. Either they reinvent or they rethink about their purpose, and that's how they would be able to really succeed and they would be able to operate. So I think from a PR and comms perspective, again, there would be a bigger emphasis on data. There would be a bigger emphasis on research, because communicators would really have to think about what their audience, what the stakeholders are thinking about, why they are thinking about that, and how they could change and impact those behaviors.
Absolutely. And taking the point forward on data and analytics and research, Sarab, I think as an observer, one of the things that I notice about the healthcare world in particular is that healthcare organizations are under an enormous amount of pressure. I mean, hospital systems are going through their maximum capacity. The biopharmaceutical companies have an incredible amount of pressure on them to find the right vaccine, the right medication for COVID-19, et cetera. And what it's resulting in is what some might call reputational challenges that might not have existed before COVID-19, despite the fact that some would argue that many of these entities in the healthcare world are sort of heroes and doing many heroic things to move the ball forward as far as COVID-19 goes. This reputational challenge, what it sort of indicates is that there may be new ways that healthcare organizations have to measure and think about analytics, because there's kind of like an unprecedented situation going on. And from a reputational standpoint, from a consumer engagement standpoint, some of the prior methods may not necessarily cut it. Just recently, I was talking to many folks from AMEC who were talking about, if you try and use something as simple as peso, or if you, try and use a straightforward framework to think about and to categorize different modalities of communication and measurement, it's hard to apply those things in these unprecedented times. And there's so much going on in the measurement world. The latest update for the Barcelona principles was just released by AMEC, et cetera. So all of this leads to a very important question that I think many of us in the audience are wondering about measurement. For healthcare organizations, will the current environment result in new measurement and evaluation methods? Will all of this activity, will it push organizations, whether it's corporations or agencies, to innovate and create new ways to measure attitudinal shifts that are important from a reputational standpoint?
Absolutely. I think I'm glad you mentioned the Barcelona principles. I'm glad you mentioned the PISO model and all the things that are so important when we think about measurement more. When I really think about the healthcare industry, and why limited to just the healthcare, you look at the consumer goods, you look at any other organizations, you look at the travel industry, you look at the retail industry. I think the things have changed so much. And as you said, it has been such a fundamental shift in the way the entire organizations had thought about it. They'd never thought about remote working to such an extent. They'd never thought about that they would have to use technology and they would have to create those tools of engagement, to really engage their employees and then really talk about productivity, think about creativity. So I think it's not just the healthcare industry, it's any industry that you could think of that would really have to think about how they measure. And when we say measure, it's not just measurement in communication, it's measurement in their marketing, it's measurement in their brands, it's measurement in any work that they do. So I think the healthcare industry, especially if I look at the work that we had been doing, and then I think about the way we would really start rethinking and reevaluating our storytelling. We would reevaluate the way we communicate with our stakeholders. I think it will all change, and it would have to change. There is no way we could really continue with not accepting the new normal. And that new normal term would mean different things for different industries and different organizations. That new normal could be telehealth for healthcare. Telehealth was something healthcare industry was really doing, but to the degree of what is happening now in telehealth was not any healthcare organization would have thought of. So I think when you really think about all the things, whether it's the change in the way they operate, the way in they do their business models, the way in they really collaborate, and the way they run their businesses, I think things have changed and they will continue to change and evolve. So when I think about it, it's the next thing would be the new normal would be so different for organizations that it's not going to be normal anymore. The word normal is not normal because it's absolutely going to be very different for different organizations.
Sure. Lawyers oftentimes use this phrase force majeure as a way to indicate in contracts unprecedented events, and to cover that from a contractual standpoint. If unprecedented events happen, then it gives the parties in the contract sort of an out in many ways. And I've been thinking about this from a measurement standpoint in the public relations and strategic communications context. Is it that the unprecedented times will actually force us to fundamentally evolve the plumbing of how we set up our metrics and our KPIs or our measurement systems? For example, from a media monitoring standpoint, a lot of folks track earned media coverage using media monitoring and social listening tools, et cetera. And many of these tools are instrumented using Boolean, search queries and things like that. They use pretty simple logic, two keywords with an and in between or with an or in between, maybe some complex logic, with some of the more advanced systems, et cetera. But, it occurs to me, Sarab, that the prominence of the public discourse and how focused it is on COVID-19, it sort of creates a situation that we've just never seen before, especially from a media monitoring standpoint, where let's say in a given category, let's say a company had, 35% share of voice in a particular industry, but now all companies are losing their share of voice to COVID-19 in a sense. Nobody's talking about specific companies, but everyone is talking about COVID-19. And so I guess the question for you, Sarab, is, when public relations practitioners are facing this challenging situation where the kind of typical approaches to measuring impact and to measuring reputation, they just, they result in sort of a little bit of a challenging outcome, for many brands, and that the results are not looking very good. Your advice to PR practitioners that are going through this sort of challenge, what might it be? Should they simply hold off on any new strategic communications campaigns that are not related to COVID-19, and that way, when the public discourse returns to some sense of normalcy, then they continue their strategic communications efforts? Or are there ways that communications practitioners can, in a very precise way, permeate the public discourse in a way that's helpful to the general public and also helpful to brands? What's your perspective on this?
Sure. I think it's a pretty interesting discussion, which I assume every communication team is having right now. When you really think about, and when we look at the share of voice, I think you raised a very interesting question, because when we do this social listening, when we look at all these reports, and it's so good that a lot of these organizations and media monitoring firms are doing these COVID reports, which comes every week, and I have subscribed to so many of them to understand what's happening, what's happening in the COVID-19 space. And everything is about COVID-19. There's no other discussion, whatever you're launching, whatever new products, new strategies, I think everything has taken a back seat. But as I think about COVID-19 and where things have moved, COVID-19 started everything, and every organization was in a very reactive phase. Everybody was just reacting to what has happened, how they would do, how would they really manage this change. And I think now, when you look at it from a healthcare perspective, the COVID-19 is in a suppression or in a mitigation stage. They're trying to mitigate it. They're trying to suppress, and these are all the healthcare terms that they use when they talk about COVID-19. And if I use the same terminology in a comms and PR perspective, if I use that, I think it's very interesting that even in a comms function, initially everything was about reacting and managing COVID-19, the messaging around it, the stories around it. But as we really start to not become an expert, but handle it better, or understand this COVID-19 situation and what it means for an organization, we are moving to really understanding what other work we could really do. Is there other PR comms work that we could really bring forward? Could we get it back to on our agenda list, for discussions, and how we could really think about it? So I think my advice for the PR and comms professionals out there, and that's what we have done as well, is we have definitely kept a great focus on COVID-19, and everybody and every organization has done it. But I think it's definitely other work, and other campaigns are definitely coming back for our work, because we understand that we have to get used to this new normal. We have to really make sure that all the work, all the strategies, and our campaigns can only take backseat for so long, and then it definitely has to come back into this new normal. And one thing which is interesting from a PR and comms standpoint is that many organizations, as I was saying, have really thought about or reinvented by making sure that when they talk about the work that they're doing, whether it's for the organization, whether it's for the communities, there is this great COVID-19 lens to it. And that's what I'm seeing in a lot of brands as well. When you see the challenge around systemic racism, the commitments organizations are making to advance equity, the way they are really working to eradicate racial discrimination at work. I think organizations are being very thoughtful and purposeful around making sure that all the work or the PR and the comms and the all the campaigns or any kind of an efforts has some kind of a COVID-19 lens to it, which is timely and relevant as well. So I think it definitely is important that we keep an eye on COVID-19, but I think as we move from a more reactive to more of a managing or mitigation stage to COVID-19, other work or other regular work is definitely coming back on the agendas, on the discussion, on the to-do list for many PR and comms colleagues I've spoken with across other organizations as well.
Sure. One thing I mentioned to many folks as an observation, Sarab, is that, and it's a controversial view, I admit, but I believe that the DNA of the public relations practitioner has been rapidly evolving over the past several years. We're shifting from a profession that was comprised with many folks that jokingly used to say that, hey, we're in public relations or communications because we weren't good at math or something like that, and we're shifting from that to a profession whose fundamental bedrock is measurement and analytics and a quantitative discipline that focuses on evaluating results. And I just think this shift is such a fascinating shift. And it's a fundamental rewiring of what we think of when we envision the modern day PR practitioner. What's your view on this, and especially as it pertains to what the PR practitioner looks like 10 years from now, 15 years from now, and beyond? How are they going to be different from what PR practitioners have looked like in the past from a skill set standpoint, from a capability standpoint, et cetera?
I think it will be so easy to answer this question if I really go back to the first question about my journey and kind of really map it with how my journey has been in the PR and comms industry. And I think we have seen such a big change. I've been in the industry for more than a decade now. And when I look at the last 10, 12, 15 years and how I started with the government and what I was working when it was Burson Marsteller and not the Cohn Wolf Burson Marsteller now, I think the idea and the work for a PR and comms professional shifted from just looking at more from a tactic and an output level to just making sure that we write well and we are wordsmithers and we are these soft sciences, to more about understanding how that would really get along or just get to our stakeholders. I saw that shift in just writing random pieces of content to really targeting it to stakeholders, and then to make sure that we have this cross-functional collaborative approach with marketing, with ad, with other things. And that's where you see the evolution of Barcelona principles. We are now at a 3.0 version, which really explains how we have really moved from not having anything at all to the first, to the second, to the third version of Barcelona principles. I think that also says a lot about how our function has evolved to understand the need to understand data and measurement and make sure that it is an integral part of our work as well. So I think the role of PR and comms has not even shifted just from a data or measurement perspective, but just in how it is seen as a strategic function. And I have seen that shift in the way the clients would reach out to you for certain work. Is it just for some kind of work which is not strategic at all, to making sure that the kind of campaigns that you're running is not just from a creative bent of mind, but also very strategic and very impactful. And I think that's the shift that has happened and will continue to happen over time. And what will happen in the next few years, which I'm pretty positive is I can see that happening now, is this bigger shift on storytelling, but storytelling which is data driven. How could you really get the pulse of your audience? And to get that pulse, it's not just your gut and your instinct or your experience that you rely on, but on data and the numbers that say how and what and why your audience is behaving or saying or acting in the way they are. And that's how you could really make sure that your communication campaign or your work really reflects on that. So I think it has been a big shift. It will continue, especially with after COVID-19, because as I said, we are rethinking, we are reinventing, we are reimagining a lot of things, because we as organizations, as brands, have understood that a pandemic like COVID-19 is a humanitarian crisis, is a health crisis, but you never know, there could be another one that could come along. So we have to be ready. It cannot be just a reactive phase that organizations or some organizations have been in. It has to be more proactive. It has to be something that they think about all from an internal and external standpoint as well. So I think it's the role of PR and comms has evolved in COVID-19, it has evolved before COVID-19, and it will evolve even further after this pandemic is over, which I hope it's soon. But I think it will definitely evolve with the shifting mindsets and consumer behaviors as well.
Sure. So there's one last question that I'd like to ask before we wrap up. And this one too is about the future. When asked about what PR practitioners are most excited about moving forward, some say that they're most excited about the fact that the profession is moving to a point where we're finally starting to be able to measure the dollar value of the impact that we're creating, the ROI that we're creating. Some are excited about the fact that increasingly strategic communications is being, as you described, perceived as not just a reactive function, but a proactive function, which is increasingly how CEOs and boards are starting to look at it. Others are just, really excited about the fact that communications moving forward, it seems to have an increasingly relevant role from a societal standpoint in managing societal relevancy, societal perceptions, et cetera. But what's your perspective on this, Sarab? Moving forward, for PR and communications, what are you most excited about in terms of the field? Is it some of these factors? Is it the evolution that we're seeing and the rapid development of new methods, et cetera? Tell us your perspective on this.
Sure. I think there are so many things that I am very positive and passionate about, and I'm thinking that and I'm pretty sure would be interesting for the PR and comms function. I have mentioned data multiple times in our conversation, and why I think data would be so integral is because the more you look at the way we are understanding our audiences, the way that we are using some of the tools, moving on from just mere media monitoring to counting the number of clips in the top tier media, organizations like us and many others have really evolved to use a lot of the natural language processing tools, AI tools, to understand what the stakeholders, what our customers are talking about us. So I think the more and more we have access to such data, the more organizations are understanding that there is a need to use that data to our benefit from a comms and PR standpoint. I know marketing and advertising and some other functions are definitely way ahead, in the way they use data, in the way they really use the insights from that data. But I think even when we look at PR and comms, one thing which would really shape the future would be data and storytelling. We had been talking about storytelling, but how we could really, just make sure that it's all understood from a data lens would be also a very interesting point. And I think the other shift that I'm seeing a lot as I talk to different professionals and different practitioners is the use of research. Research was seen such a dry thing and has always been, especially from a PR and comms. And research is only understood as a survey that you would once in a year do, perhaps for a reputation, or research would be understood as something that you would have to spend a lot of money on and you go out and do it. But I think organizations, especially functions like PR and comms, are understanding that the more we could really understand research and how that could help us, not just in our creative process, but in our strategic process and everywhere around, every step of the process. I think that's where I see a greater opportunity in the future as well. Research would definitely make a lot of difference in the way we think about communications as well. And I say that research, not just in understanding who our stakeholders are, research, not just in understanding, what would that mean, but I think research in making sure that we could measure our impact, we could really see how we are making a difference, how we are moving the needle. Research would be very integral for PR and comms professional as well. So I see a great opportunity for data, which many would call, has been big data, for example, has been a word which the PR and comms function really got fascinated with. We started talking about it, then we didn't know what to do with it. Then there was this shift on saying, how do we really do the ROI? And then we had a struggle with a term called AVE. So we have seen a lot of different things come and go. But one thing which has stayed and which will continue to be important is the strategic use of data. It's not just using data, but using it strategically, and then making sure that we have this research understanding and the understanding of how to use research in comms. And that's why organizations like IPR and the work we are doing at Measurement Commission, is so important, because I think it really brings to the forefront the need for us to understand data, research, storytelling, all in a very strategic way, and not just in a checkbox or a tick mark kind of a thing, saying we do have data, but we don't know what to do with it. We do research, but we do it once a year, and we definitely do a survey, or we do an annual employee survey, but we don't know what to do with it. So I think there's so many questions now. And now with COVID, as we were discussing earlier, the more the consumers' attitudes, will shift, and it has already shifted. And a lot of the research says that it will stay the way it is now. The way people are really doing things online, the way, people are shopping, the way people are consuming things, the way they are really focusing on the love for local, or how they are really contributing to the brands and organizations that have a purpose. I think this discussion around purpose would really come back again, because COVID, all the protest against, systemic racism, the challenges in how we are dealing with this economic situation right now, has really brought a lot of attention and responsibility to organizations and brand, where we have to think about our purpose. And by purpose, it's not just the purpose of the organization. It's not just the me, but it's the we. What the organizations do with the society becomes all the more important as well. So I think there has been a fundamental shift. it is here to stay. It's not going to go back to where it was. People, organizations, governments, institutions around the world would have to think about this new normal, would have to reinvent and reimagine what they want to do from a business perspective, from a society perspective, from a community perspective, from as an employer, and so many roles that they have.
Absolutely. Indeed, the strategic use of data, I think, is going to be a huge uh, part of the future of public relations, and many of the points you made resonate, I think, with me, especially given the current environment. Well, Sarab, I think that's it for our time today. Thank you so much for this insightful discussion. I know our audience has benefited greatly from this, so we're very grateful for your time. Thanks for being on.
Thank you so much, Mo. Thanks for inviting me to this wonderful series. I follow your conversations with others, and I think it's very helpful where we could really come together and think about the challenges, but also how we could solve some of those challenges with data and research. So I loved our conversation today, and thank you so much again for inviting me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being on. As a reminder for our audience, the Institute for Public Relations mission is to illuminate the science beneath the art of public relations, which it has been doing now for decades. The Measurement Commission specifically is a committee that is really focused on the measurement and evaluation side of things, specifically as it pertains to the development, the adoption, and the standardization of measurement and evaluation programs. So this series is very dedicated to reaching a broader audience in the public relations community. We've heard from many folks that the IPR has just so much incredible content, but it's not reaching folks in the right way. So with this video series, our goal is really to increase the digestibility and the visibility of the content that we're generating. So so with that, I think that's it for today, and we'll be back to you in another week. So thanks again.